And Mason was the one who recognized that this size of cars and cost of cars had gone to an extreme. So he's the one that really started, even right after World War II, to begin to develop a more sensible car. And he produced a lot of different kinds of cars, in mock-ups and in prototypes, three-wheelers and four-wheelers. And out of that came the Rambler. And I was just fortunate enough to be invited by him in 1948 to join Nash Kelvinator. And I weighed that pretty carefully. I had another offer that was better in terms of position and salary and so on. But the reason I joined Nash Kelvinator was because ahead of World War II, when I was running the Automobile Manufacturers Association for the whole industry, we made a study of car use figures. And car use figures indicated that most trips, automobile trips in this country, were 13 miles or less. And I concluded way back then that you didn't need a great big several-ton car to go to the drugstore to get a package of bobby pins. And that there was going to be a change not only in car use, but also in the character of the car. So when I was showing the Rambler, I said that's the car of the future. And that's why I joined Nash Kelvinator back in 1948, a couple of years before the Rambler was actually put on the market. The year the Rambler was put on the market, there were a half a dozen Volkswagens sold in this country, no other foreign cars of any consequence. So I was way ahead of others in undertaking to take advantage of this change in the economics of the automobile market. And the Rambler will never get credit for all it did. It never will. And the reason it won't is because the people who followed me, as Foster points out in his book, didn't believe in the Rambler and the philosophy that we relied on to make the Rambler a success, which was to spread the tooling over as large a volume of cars as you possibly could. And the toughest decision I had to make was whether or not to drop the Nash and Hudson lines and concentrate on the Rambler. And that's what I did. And we spread the tooling costs over a volume of Ramblers that reached the point where we were fully competitive with the big three. We were taking away big three dealers, and we were on the march. And the great tragedy is, from a company standpoint, is that my successors didn't recognize what we were doing, didn't recognize the opportunity we had, and didn't follow through on it. Because if they had, American Motors would be one of the top big automobile companies in this country today, but they didn't do that. Now, there was one difference between Mason and me. Mason always thought of the Rambler as a supplement to the Nash and Hudson lines. That if he could have Nash and Hudson dealers selling Ramblers rather than just Nash dealers, that was the way to make the Rambler a success. My strategy was the Rambler's the car of the future. In the first talk I made to the American Motors dealer body, I quoted Ibsen. I said, he is in the right who's most clearly in league with the future. And I said, we're in league with the future of the automobile market. And we were. And that was the difference in the basic strategy. And strategy in an organization is one of the three essentials that you have to be right on if the organization is going to be a success. And the Rambler was the first successful economical compact car on the American market. It pushed the big three into compact car production, and it would have continued that march if the strategy had been pursued. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But you want to read about that, get Foster's book. I didn't know exactly what had happened in detail until I got Foster's book. As I was busy running Michigan and doing other stuff, I knew in a general way what was happening, but I didn't know specifically what was happening. He details it all out, A, B, C, D, F. So you ought to get that book. Well, that ushered in the third period in the auto industry. This period of cars becoming more sensible again, the Rambler having led that way. And then we've just been through a fourth period, and that's the Japanese period. The Japanese penetration of our market has done one good thing. It stopped the unions and the managements from battling each other. Now they're trying to create teamwork to match the Japanese teamwork. And I won't go into the detail of it, but the lack of teamwork there in that period enabled the Japanese to come in and to have superior quality and to have superior costs, and has compelled the remaining American automobile companies to become more competitive by getting their costs down and by getting their quality up. So that's another period. And we're just beginning to move into a totally different period, and that's of global competition. The auto competition from this point on is going to be worldwide, and no telling what the impact will be of the Asian companies as they come in to this picture, and the Asian companies other than Japan, because they're going to be a big factor down the road, and to have automobile production and sales in this country that will benefit this country instead of imports is going to take the ability of the managements and the workers in this country to collaborate more effectively than they have up to this time. But that's a whole new period that lies just ahead. Now let me turn to the country. My deepest concerns today are not about the auto industry. After all, I haven't been in the auto industry since 1962. In 1962, I was elected governor of Michigan. And since then, I've served 6 years as governor, and I quit in the middle of my third term to go to Washington in the cabinet. And I was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Nixon. And I saw what was happening to our cities. I saw what was happening as a result of the people in the inner city fleeing to the suburbs and creating two cities in every big urban area, an inner city and an outer city, two totally different environments. And I was profoundly concerned about that. But in any event, the country's been through certain periods too. There was the period before the Civil War when the country was really being founded, and of course the Civil War really founded it as a nation. Lincoln saved it as a nation. And then there was a period during which the continent was being settled and conquered, so that was a period. And then there was a third period that was ushered in by Henry Ford, the industrialization of our country, and this country becoming the greatest creditor nation on earth and the most successful nation on earth that lifted most of its people beyond the people of any other nation in terms of their standard of living. So that was a third period. And the very magnitude of that success economically, making this country the most prosperous nation on earth, has ushered in another period. And this other period is the result of the magnitude of that success. Walt Whitman in his Leaves of Grass wrote, "It's provided in the essence of things that every fruition of success, no matter what, is followed by something making necessary a still greater struggle." And as a result of the tremendous prosperity we've had in this country, and as a result of the politicians misusing that prosperity to try and solve problems with just government and money, especially social problems, our social problems have exploded. And this nation is confronted with unprecedented spiritual, moral, and social problems. When kids are having kids and the government's subsidizing it, and subsidizing it only if the father isn't out of the home. Could you have conceived of that 30 years ago? I couldn't have. When kids are killing kids, when so many kids are going into school that they're not ready to learn, and when a teacher can only spend about 15 minutes out of the hour educating, the rest of the time she's trying to discipline the kids, we're not going to have an educated set of employees. And one reason we became the most prosperous nation on earth was because when Henry Ford and the others took off, we had the best educated populace in the world as a result of public education. Now we're not even equaling the other industrial nations. We don't even equal our own level of education achievement. And this, in my opinion, together with the moral and crime and other problems, constitute a threat to the future of this nation of an unprecedented character. I think we're confronted with the most serious challenge since the Civil War. And I happen to agree with Senator Paul Tsongas. In the last presidential election, we had a number of candidates. I thought the most thoughtful was Paul Tsongas, Senator Paul Tsongas of Massachusetts. He spent a lot of time analyzing things and wrote a great message. And the press only concentrated on his the economic part of his message. When he said we've got to get rid of this deficit, we can't have this build up in debt endlessly without ruining ourselves, and that's absolutely correct. And at that time Clinton was opposing him, but then after Tsongas got knocked out by a special interest, and that's a very revealing thing politically, but in any event, Clinton began to talk like Tsongas, and I began to act a little like Tsongas, and Perot invited Tsongas down to Dallas and picked his brain, and he began to talk about what Tsongas had been talking about in a more dramatic way, admittedly, and a more interesting way. But in any event, Tsongas dealt with more than the economic problems. In his message, and the media ignored this, he talked about these social problems. And he said, and this is Tsongas, they cannot be solved just with government programs or just with money, but only one-to-one, human being to human being, volunteerism and private institutional outreach. In other words, what he was saying was, these people problems that are threatening the future of this country more than anything else can always be solved by people helping people. And he said as long as we have this underclass in our inner cities, its horrendous economic burden will prevent us from ever being globally competitive. And that problem has greatly increased since he made that message. We haven't turned it around, it's still growing. This country has a great challenge. As a matter of fact, it's got the greatest challenge that has developed for any great nation in history. John Steinbeck wrote, "No great nation has ever achieved plenty, comfort, and leisure and remained great." And I spent my 19th, 20th, 21st year in Great Britain when Great Britain ruled the world as we never had. And I've seen Great Britain do what all other great nations have done. They commit suicide. Lincoln said that that's what would happen to us ultimately if we were ever destroyed. We'd commit suicide. And that's what we're in the process of doing, is we let these social, spiritual, social, and moral problems multiply in our country. Now, I'm not going to go on and tell you what ought to be done about that. I got to save a little bit of something tonight. I got to talk to, he said, for 10 minutes tonight. So I want to tell you what we need to do about that. And I'm engaged personally in spending more time trying to do something about that than anything else I'm involved in currently. Because I'm absolutely convinced that Tsongas is right. These social problems that have been built up cannot be solved with additional government programs. They can only be solved by Americans pitching in and beginning to help each other and resolve these problems that are destroying our very future as a society. So I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. And when you take a look at the homicide rate in our cities and the fact that violent crime has increased by 600%, almost 600% in the last 30 years, you can see that there's some point to the most telling criticism ever made of our country. The most telling criticism ever made of our country was by Lord Macaulay, the British historian, and he said, your constitution is all sail and no anchor. You will generate within the Huns and Vandals that will destroy you. And I want to tell you tonight what you can do to be helpful in preventing that from happening. Thank you very much.